Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog, and today I'd like to explain some of the terminology I use to describe stitches in many of my tutorials. The leading leg, trailing leg, front leg, and back leg of a stitch. Before I do that, let's talk about our knitting needles so we can get oriented. No matter what style of knitter you are, the needle you are actively using to form new stitches is called the working needle. In most cases, the working needle is going to be the one in your right hand. Continental knitters use the working needle to poke through a stitch, pick the yarn, and form a new stitch for both knits and also for purls. English knitters also use the working needle to poke through the stitch, but then they wrap or throw the yarn around the working needle to form the new stitch, again for both purls and for knits. Now we can talk more about stitch legs. If we take a stitch off of our knitting needles and lay it flat, you can see that the lower portion of the stitch kind of looks like a V. Each side of the V is going to be a leg of the stitch. When we're knitting, the first stitch leg that our working needle encounters as we're knitting is known as the leading leg of the stitch. That makes the second leg of the stitch the trailing or following leg. These terms are often used by knitting teachers, but you probably won't see them in books or patterns. Knitting instructions and abbreviations more often refer to the front and back legs of a stitch. The front leg of the stitch is the one that you're looking at on the front of your work. The back leg of a stitch is going to be at the back of your work, so it isn't easily visible while you're actually knitting. Conventionally, all of your stitches, both knits and purls, should be mounted on your non-working needle with the leading leg of the stitch at the front and the trailing leg of the stitch at the back. Since this is the standard stitch mount, book, pattern, and tutorial publishers can safely refer to the front and back leg of a stitch in their instructions instead of leading and trailing legs. Don't panic if your stitches are not conventionally mounted. It doesn't mean you're necessarily knitting wrong. If your stitches are not all mounted with the same orientation, and sometimes the leading leg of the stitch is at the front of the needle, but sometimes the leading leg of the stitch is here at the back of the needle, it likely means you're a combination knitter. I'll include links to a couple of my combination knitting videos in the description below. Because combination knitters don't use the conventional stitch mount for all of their stitches, there are situations when adjustments need to be made so their stitches don't get twisted up. But that's a topic for another day. I hope you enjoyed learning some basic stitch terminology, and if you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel, The Chili Dog, for weekly knitting tips, terms, and tutorials. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!